Eleanor Blackwood stepped off the steamship onto the bustling port of New York, her black morning dress billowing in the autumn breeze. The year was 1845, and she had just completed the arduous journey from Caracas, Venezuela, where she had buried her husband, Thomas, a failed merchant who had left her with nothing but debts and a leather-bound journal filled with his delirious final writings. Mrs. Blackwood, a tall man with a weathered face and calculating eyes, approached her. "I'm Mr. Hargrove, your late husband's attorney. I trust your journey was tolerable." Eleanor nodded stiffly, clutching her small valise. "As tolerable as one might expect when fleeing creditors, Mr. Hargrove." The lawyer's expression remained impassive as he guided her through the crowd. "Your husband's affairs in Venezuela were most unusual, but you'll find sanctuary with your cousin in Massachusetts. The Caldwell family has agreed to take you in, at least until you can establish yourself." The carriage ride north was silent and tense. Eleanor spent the hours studying her husband's journal, trying to make sense of the rambling entries that had begun shortly after they'd arrived in Venezuela 3 years prior. Thomas had been fascinated by the local legends of a powerful bloodline dating back to Spanish colonization, one that supposedly possessed remarkable longevity and resilience to disease. "He became obsessed," Eleanor murmured, more to herself than to Hargrove. "Said he'd found them, the descendants of the original bloodline. That's when everything changed." Hargrove shifted uncomfortably. "Your husband made many claims in his correspondence. Most dismiss them as tropical fever affecting his mind. And what do you believe, Mr. Hargrove?" Eleanor fixed him with a penetrating stare. "I believe, Mrs. Blackwood, that some mysteries are best left unexplored." His eyes flicked meaningfully to the journal, especially when they involve matters of blood. 3 days later, they arrived at the imposing Caldwell estate in Salem, Massachusetts. A grand house of red brick and white trim, it loomed against the grey October sky like a sentinel. Eleanor's cousin, Abigail Caldwell, greeted her with the practiced warmth of the socially obligated. "My dear Eleanor," Abigail embraced her briefly. "How terrible about Thomas. You must be exhausted." Inside, Eleanor was shown to a small room on the 3rd floor, comfortable but clearly separate from the family quarters. That evening at dinner, she met Abigail's husband, Jonathan, a stern banker with cold eyes, and their 3 children, twins, Esther and Elizabeth, both 17, and young William, barely 10. "Mrs. Blackwood comes to us from Venezuela," Jonathan announced to the children. "A most uncivilized place, I understand." "Actually," Eleanor countered, "Caracas is quite cosmopolitan, though I spent much of my time in the countryside where Thomas conducted his research." "And what research was that?" Esther asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Eleanor hesitated, feeling Jonathan's disapproving gaze. "My husband was interested in genealogy, particularly the mixing of bloodlines between European settlers and native peoples." A heavy silence fell over the table. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Hardly appropriate dinner conversation, Mrs. Blackwood. Here in Salem, we're quite particular about lineage." Later that night, alone in her room, Eleanor unpacked Thomas's journal and a small wooden box he had entrusted to her before his death. Inside lay 6 vials of dark liquid, carefully labeled with names and dates. She ran her fingers over them, remembering Thomas's final words. "They're watching us, Eleanor. They know what I've discovered. The blood, it's the answer. Guard it with your life." The wind howled outside her window, and somewhere in the distance, a dog began to howl. Eleanor closed the box and slipped it beneath a loose floorboard she'd discovered beneath the bed. As she straightened, she caught her reflection in the mirror, gaunt, pale, determined. "What did you really find in Venezuela, Thomas?" she whispered. "And why were you so afraid?" Within a week of Eleanor's arrival, the Caldwell household began to change in subtle, disquieting ways. The first incident occurred during breakfast, when young William suddenly looked up from his porridge and stared directly at Eleanor. "You brought something bad with you," he said flatly. "I can smell it in your room." Jonathan Caldwell's spoon clattered against his plate. "William, apologize to your cousin immediately." The boy's eyes never left Eleanor's face. "It smells like the graveyard, Father, like the earth after they put someone in it." That evening, Eleanor discovered her door unlocked and the floorboard disturbed. Nothing had been taken, but someone had been searching. She relocated Thomas's box to the hollow space behind a loose brick in the fireplace and began keeping detailed notes of her own. As October deepened toward November, Eleanor noticed Abigail lingering outside her door at night, sometimes for hours. When confronted, her cousin offered only vague excuses about checking on her welfare. The twins, meanwhile, shadowed Eleanor throughout the house, whispering behind their hands whenever she entered a room. Only Mr. Hargrove's weekly visits provided any respite. The attorney brought news from Venezuela. Thomas's creditors were still searching for assets, and strange rumors had begun circulating about his research. "They're saying your husband violated sacred ground," Hargrove said quietly during one visit. "That he collected blood samples from descendants of an ancient lineage, one that traces back to the first contact between Spanish explorers and the indigenous peoples. Some believe this bloodline carries unusual properties." Eleanor thought of the vials hidden in her fireplace. What kind of properties? Hargrove leaned closer. Resistance to disease, extended youth. Some even whisper of healing abilities. Nonsense, of course, but the local authorities take such matters seriously. There's talk of rituals your husband might have interrupted. That night, Eleanor woke to find Elizabeth Caldwell standing at the foot of her bed, eyes blank and unfocused. "We know what you have," the girl whispered. "Mother says it belongs to us. The blood calls to blood." Eleanor bolted upright. "Elizabeth, are you ill?" The girl smiled, a terrible, empty expression. "He told us you would come, the one who speaks through Mother. He says the mixing must continue." Before Eleanor could respond, Elizabeth turned and walked from the room like a sleepwalker. In the morning, the girl had no recollection of the incident, but Eleanor noticed a new intensity in Abigail's gaze. Later that day, Eleanor ventured into Salem proper, ostensibly to purchase sewing supplies. Instead, she sought out the offices of the local newspaper, where she requested access to their archives. "I'm researching the Caldwell family history," she explained to the clerk, "particularly any connections to Venezuela or South America." The search yielded little until she discovered a yellowing article from 1798 detailing the return of Samuel Caldwell, Jonathan's grandfather, from a commercial expedition to Venezuela. He had returned with a young bride, described only as a lady of mysterious origins and exceptional beauty. Within a year of her arrival in Salem, a strange illness had swept through the town, claiming 27 lives before suddenly abating. As Eleanor read further, her blood chilled. The final passage reported, "Though many called for investigation into the foreign woman's role in the contagion, no charges were brought." The Caldwell estate remained quarantined for 3 months, after which Samuel emerged with his wife and newborn son, all in perfect health despite the household staff having perished to the last person. Eleanor copied the article with shaking hands. The pieces were beginning to fit together. Thomas's obsession with bloodlines, the vials, the Caldwell's strange behavior. As she left the newspaper office, she felt eyes upon her. Turning, she glimpsed a figure in a dark coat watching her from across the street. Mr. Hargrove. She quickened her pace, mind racing. Could she trust anyone? The answers, she realized, must lie in Thomas's journal. That night she would decode his cryptic entries once and for all. Rain lashed against the windows as Eleanor huddled by candlelight, Thomas's journal open on her lap. After weeks of study, she had begun to unravel his coded language. References to vessels were actually people. Transference meant blood collection, and the lineage referred to descendants of a specific union between a Spanish conquistador and a powerful indigenous healer in 1521. The bloodline carries remarkable properties, Thomas had written. Subjects demonstrate accelerated healing and resistance to diseases that decimated native populations. More astonishing still, those with the highest concentration appear to age at a significantly reduced rate. I have confirmed cases of individuals in their 9th decade who appear no older than 40. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned the page, revealing a crude family tree. At its root was the name Isabella Caldwell, née Vargas, Jonathan's grandmother, the mysterious Venezuelan bride. "My God," she whispered. Thomas didn't just study the bloodline, he discovered its connection to the Caldwells. Further pages detailed Thomas's growing paranoia. "They are watching me now." The Caldwell agent appeared again today, offering an absurd sum for my research. When I refused, his demeanor changed. "The blood must return to the blood," he said. "The matron demands it." Eleanor froze. The matron. Abigail's increasingly strange behavior, her midnight prowling, the vacant expressions that occasionally crossed her face. Could she be this matron Thomas had feared? A noise from the hallway interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor quickly extinguished her candle and moved to the door, pressing her ear against it. Hushed voices, Jonathan and Abigail, drifted through the wood. "She knows something," Jonathan hissed. "Hargrove confirmed she visited the newspaper archives." "Patience, husband." Abigail's voice was eerily calm. "The convergence approaches." Her husband collected the necessary samples, Venezuelan branches of our line, untainted by American dilution. Once we have them, we can proceed with the ritual. And if she resists, then we take what we need by force. Abigail's tone sent chills down Eleanor's spine. The mixing must continue, as it has since Isabella first received her divine instruction. Our bloodline must remain strong. Eleanor backed away from the door, mind reeling. Divine instruction? A ritual? She turned to Thomas's journal, frantically searching for answers. In the final pages, she found a hastily scrawled entry. Isabella Caldwell believed God spoke to her during a fever, commanding her to preserve and strengthen her unique bloodline. Each generation, the family identifies distant relations carrying the blood, brings them to Salem under various pretexts, and through ritual consumption of combined blood renews their longevity and resistance to disease. Eleanor must be warned. They will come for her next, not knowing she carries no trace of the bloodline herself. The floor creaked outside her door. Eleanor quickly hid the journal and vials inside her dress as her door swung open, revealing Abigail in a white nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Cousin," Abigail smiled, her eyes feverish. "Why are you awake at this hour? Are you unwell?" "Just restless," Eleanor replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The storm?" Abigail glided into the room. "I've been meaning to ask about Thomas's research. He sent Jonathan several letters before his death, mentioning a discovery of great importance to our family." "I know very little about my husband's work," Eleanor lied. "He kept his research private. Yet he entrusted something to you before he died." Abigail's smile never wavered. "A small wooden box, perhaps, with contents most precious?" Eleanor's heart pounded. "I don't know what you mean." Abigail moved closer, reaching out to touch Eleanor's cheek with ice-cold fingers. "The matron knows all, cousin. The blood calls to blood. Tomorrow night is the convergence, when the stars align as they did when Isabella received her divine command. You will join us in the ceremony, willingly or not." With that, Abigail turned and left, pulling the door closed behind her. Eleanor stood frozen in terror, clutching Thomas's journal to her chest. She had until tomorrow night to escape, or to stop whatever horrific ritual the Caldwells had planned. Morning arrived with unsettling calm. The Caldwell family behaved as though nothing unusual had occurred. Jonathan left for the bank, the twins attended their lessons, and young William played quietly in the garden. Only Abigail's knowing smiles betrayed the previous night's confrontation. Eleanor feigned illness to remain in her room, using the time to study Thomas's journal more carefully. The final pages contained detailed notes on the ritual itself, gleaned from documents Thomas had discovered in Venezuela. The ceremony requires blood from at least 5 branches of the lineage, he had written, combined under a new moon and consumed by the entire family. It reinforces their unnatural longevity. Isabella established this ritual in 1798, and it has continued every 50 years since. Those who resist are drained completely, their blood taken by force. Eleanor shuddered, remembering the newspaper account of the mysterious illness that had swept Salem after Isabella's arrival, and the servants who had all perished while the Caldwells survived. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mr. Hargrove stood at her door, hat in hand. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said formally, "may I have a word?" Eleanor hesitated, then stepped aside to admit him. "I saw you outside the newspaper office yesterday," she said once the door was closed. "Have you been watching me?" "Protecting you," Hargrove corrected, though he wouldn't meet her eyes. "Though I fear I've failed in that regard." "The Caldwells know you have the samples. And whose side are you on, Mr. Hargrove?" Eleanor demanded. The attorney sighed heavily. "I've served the Caldwell family for 20 years, Mrs. Blackwood. I've seen things that defy explanation. Jonathan hasn't aged a day in all that time. When they learned of your husband's research, they sent me to retrieve it. I never imagined Thomas would die before I arrived." "They killed him," Eleanor whispered, the truth finally dawning. "The Caldwells had Thomas murdered when he refused to surrender his research." Hargrove looked away. "I cannot confirm nor deny—" "Stop with the legal equivocations," Eleanor hissed. "Tonight they intend to use me in some blood ritual. I need to escape now." To her surprise, Hargrove nodded. "That's why I'm here. There's a coach waiting 2 streets over. It will take you to Boston, where you can board a ship to anywhere you choose." He pressed a purse of coins into her hand. "This should cover your expenses." Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "Why help me now?" "What changed?" "Young William," Hargrove said quietly. "He's showing signs of instability. Violent tendencies. Each generation, the effects of their blood mixing become more unpredictable. Some gain longevity, others develop disturbing appetites. I fear what may happen if they obtain your husband's samples and complete another cycle." Eleanor gathered her few belongings, including Thomas's journal and the precious vials. "What will you tell them?" "That you overpowered me." Hargrove smiled grimly. "A believable tale, as I'm not as young as I appear." 20 minutes later, Eleanor was hurrying through Salem's back streets toward the rendezvous point. The afternoon sky had darkened prematurely, heavy clouds gathering despite the morning's clear weather. As she turned a corner, a small figure stepped into her path. William Caldwell. "Mother said you'd try to leave," the boy said, his voice unnaturally adult. "The blood must return to the blood." Eleanor backed away. "William, please, go home to your mother." The boy's face contorted into a snarl, and with shocking speed he lunged at her. Eleanor barely managed to dodge, dropping her bag in the process. William fell upon it instantly, tearing through the contents until he found the wooden box. "William, no!" Eleanor cried, but the boy had already opened it, staring in wonder at the vials inside. What happened next would haunt Eleanor for the rest of her life. William, with deliberate slowness, removed the stopper from one vial and drank its contents. His small body immediately convulsed, his back arching at an impossible angle as he screamed, a high, inhuman sound that echoed through the empty street. Eleanor watched in horror as dark veins spread across the boy's face, his eyes rolling back to show only whites. Blood began to seep from his ears, his nose, his mouth. Within moments, he collapsed to the ground, still convulsing. Fighting her revulsion, Eleanor grabbed the box with the remaining vials and fled. Behind her, William's screams transformed into something else, a wet, gurgling laugh that followed her all the way to the waiting coach. Drive! She gasped to the startled coachman as she leapt inside. For God's sake, drive now! As the coach lurched into motion, Eleanor looked back toward Salem. Dark clouds now hung directly over the Caldwell estate, unnatural in their perfect positioning. Tonight would have been their ceremony, the convergence Thomas had written about. Instead, they would be dealing with whatever transformation young William was undergoing. In her lap, she clutched the wooden box containing what remained of Thomas's terrible discovery. Not a gift, as the Caldwells believed, but a curse, a bloodline that had become increasingly corrupted through Isabella Caldwell's misguided, divine instruction to mix and preserve it. Eleanor made a vow as Salem faded behind her. She would destroy the remaining vials, burn Thomas's journal, and ensure that the Caldwells never completed their ritual again. The blood, the corrupted, tainted blood that had claimed her husband's life, and now young William's innocence, would end with her. Boston's harbor stretched before Eleanor like a promise of freedom, ship's masts swaying gently in the evening breeze. She had arrived just as the last vestiges of daylight faded, the coach driver having pushed his horses to their limits at her insistence. Every shadow, every sudden movement had made her start during the journey, certain that Abigail or Jonathan would materialize in pursuit. "Where to now, ma'am?" the driver asked, helping Eleanor down from the coach. His eyes kept darting nervously back toward the road from Salem. "The harbour master's office," she replied, clutching her valise close. Inside, wrapped in layers of clothing, lay the wooden box with its remaining 5 vials and Thomas's journal. "I need passage on the first ship leaving port, regardless of destination." The driver nodded, clearly eager to complete their transaction and distance himself from whatever trouble followed this pale, determined woman. Eleanor pressed extra coins into his palm. "You saw nothing and no one today," she said firmly, "for your safety as well as mine." At the harbour master's office, Eleanor discovered her options were limited. Only 2 vessels were departing before morning, a merchant ship bound for Baltimore and a whaling vessel heading for the Atlantic. Neither captain was enthusiastic about taking on a lone female passenger with no apparent chaperone. "Please," Eleanor finally resorted to begging the weather-beaten captain of the whaling ship, a man named Jeremiah Sloane. "I can pay handsomely. I must leave Boston tonight." Captain Sloane studied her face, taking note of her fine clothing and obvious distress. "Running from something, are you, or someone?" "Family troubles," Eleanor managed, which was not entirely untrue. The captain spat on the ground. "Got no use for a gentlewoman aboard my vessel. Men get superstitious with a female passenger during the hunt." "I won't be a passenger for long," Eleanor countered. "Just take me as far as Nantucket. I have connections there." Another lie, but one born of desperation. Before Sloane could respond, the door to the harbour master's office burst open. Eleanor's heart nearly stopped as Mr. Hargrove entered, his usually immaculate clothing dishevelled, a bloody cut across his forehead. "Mrs. Blackwood," he gasped. "Thank God I found you." Eleanor backed away, looking frantically for another exit. "Stay back! I know you're working with them!" Hargrove raised his hands placatingly. "You misunderstand. William, what happened to him? They believe you poisoned him deliberately." Captain Sloane looked between them with narrowed eyes. "This some kind of domestic dispute?" "She's in grave danger," Hargrove addressed the captain directly. "As is anyone helping her. The Caldwells are coming, and they're not alone." "What do you mean, not alone?" Eleanor whispered. Hargrove's face was ashen. "After you fled, William's condition worsened. The blood he consumed was not compatible with his own unique mixture, but instead of killing him, it transformed him. I've never seen anything like it." "What are you saying?" "The boy is changed." Hargrove shuddered at the memory. "Stronger, faster, but his mind, he's responding only to Abigail now, like an attack dog. They're using him to track you by scent. They'll be here within the hour." Captain Sloane had heard enough. "I don't know what kind of trouble you're mixed up in, lady, but it sounds like witchcraft to me. I'll have no part of it." He turned to leave. "Wait!" Eleanor cried, reaching into her valise. She withdrew one of the vials, holding it toward the light. This is what they want. It's blood, a specific bloodline with unusual properties. My husband researched it in Venezuela before they murdered him. The Caldwells believe it will grant them extended life. Hargrove stared at the vial. You don't understand what you possess, Mrs. Blackwood. That blood is power. There are those who would kill for even a drop. Which is why it must be destroyed, Eleanor insisted. All of it. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the office window, Eleanor could see torches approaching from the direction of the main road into Boston. At their head walked Abigail, Jonathan, and the twins, their faces set in identical expressions of cold determination. Between the parents walked, or rather loped, a small figure that only vaguely resembled William Caldwell. Even at this distance, Eleanor could see that something was terribly wrong with the boy's proportions, his movements jerky and animal-like. "They're here," Hargrove whispered unnecessarily. Captain Sloane peered out the window, his weathered face paling at the sight. "Devil's work," he muttered, crossing himself. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, he grabbed her arm. "My ship leaves in 20 minutes. If you're aboard, so be it. If not..." He left the consequence unspoken. "Thank you," Eleanor breathed. She turned to Hargrove. "Will you come? Help me destroy these samples once we're safely away?" The attorney shook his head. "I'll delay them as best I can. Give you time to board." He hesitated, then added, "What happened to William? It's just the beginning. The Caldwell bloodline has grown too twisted over the generations. Isabella's divine instruction was never from God at all." Eleanor clutched the vial tighter. "Then whose instruction was it?" Hargrove's eyes were hollow. "In his final correspondence, your husband wrote of an entity the native peoples called the Thirsty One, a spirit that feeds on blood and suffering. Isabella didn't receive a message from God in that fever. She was possessed." Outside, the torches were drawing closer. Eleanor could now see that it wasn't just the Caldwells. A small crowd followed them, faces blank and obedient, like sleepwalkers. "The matron's influence," Hargrove explained grimly. "Abigail can control weak minds when necessary. Go, Mrs. Blackwood. Destroy those samples before they can be used again." Eleanor hesitated, then pressed Thomas's journal into Hargrove's hands. "The final pages detail how to end this, permanently. If I fail..." The attorney nodded once. "Godspeed, Mrs. Blackwood." "Die!" As Eleanor hurried toward the docks with Captain Sloane, she looked back once to see Hargrove stepping outside to confront the approaching Caldwells, Thomas's journal hidden inside his coat. Whether his sacrifice would buy her enough time remained to be seen. The whaling vessel, ironically named the Salvation, was already preparing to depart when they reached it. Sailors moved with practiced efficiency, barely sparing a glance for the woman being hustled aboard by their captain. Eleanor was quickly ushered to a small cabin normally reserved for the first mate, who would now bunk with the regular crew. "We cast off in 10 minutes, Sloane informed her curtly. "Stay below until I say otherwise." "Bye." Through the cabin's small porthole, Eleanor watched the harbour. The torches had reached the harbour master's office. Even from this distance, she could hear Abigail's voice, unnaturally loud, as though carried by the wind itself. "Bring her to me. The blood must return to the blood." A sailor shouted from above that they were ready to depart. Eleanor felt the first movement as the Salvation began to pull away from the dock. Relief washed through her, short-lived, as a commotion erupted on shore. To her horror, Eleanor saw the twisted form that had been William Caldwell break away from his parents and sprint toward the water. Without hesitation, the boy thing dove into the harbour and began swimming with inhuman speed toward the departing ship. "Captain!" Eleanor screamed, bursting from her cabin. "Something's coming!" Sloane, already at the wheel, followed her pointing finger. His weathered face hardened at the sight of the small figure cutting through the water with unnatural swiftness. "Man the harpoons!" he bellowed to his crew. "We've got a devil on our tail!" As sailors scrambled to obey, Eleanor clutched the wooden box containing the remaining vials. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The corrupted bloodline that had destroyed her husband, transformed William, and enslaved the Caldwells to a thirsty ancient evil must end here, in the cold waters of Boston Harbor. The Salvation's crew lined the railings, harpoons and whaling hooks raised as the thing that had been William Caldwell closed the distance between ship and shore with terrifying speed. In the fading light, his transformation was even more apparent. Limbs elongated to grotesque proportions, fingers splayed into claw-like appendages that sliced through the water with horrifying efficiency. "What manner of creature is that?" Captain Sloane demanded, gripping Eleanor's arm so tightly she winced. "A boy," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Just a boy who drank what should never have been consumed." On shore, the Caldwells had reached the edge of the dock. Even at this growing distance, Eleanor could see Abigail's face contorted in fury, one arm raised toward the ship as if trying to pull it back through sheer force of will. The crowd behind her remained motionless, awaiting commands that would never reach them as the Salvation moved steadily out to sea. "It's gaining!" shouted a sailor from the stern. Captain Sloane released Eleanor and grabbed a nearby harpoon. "Whatever it is, it won't set foot on my vessel." Eleanor clutched the railing, watching in horror as William's misshapen form surged through the water. She could see his face now, features fluid and unstable, as though the blood he'd consumed was still reshaping him from within. His eyes, once a child's innocent blue, now glowed with an unholy amber light. The vials, she realized suddenly. He can sense them. The blood calls to blood, just as Abigail said. Without hesitation, Eleanor ran back to her cabin and retrieved one vial from the wooden box. Returning to the deck, she held it high, the dark liquid catching the last crimson rays of sunset. "William," she called out, drawing shocked looks from the sailors, "is this what you want?" The creature paused in the water, head tilting unnaturally as those amber eyes fixed on the vial. A sound emerged from its throat, not a child's voice, but a ravenous growl that raised gooseflesh on every man present. "Mrs. Blackwood, what are you doing?" Captain Sloane hissed. "Saving your ship," Eleanor replied, not taking her eyes from William. She moved toward the port side, away from the cluster of sailors. "He won't stop, not while I have these." The creature resumed its pursuit, but now its trajectory had changed. It was following Eleanor specifically as she moved along the railing. Good. She needed it focused solely on her. "Ready, men!" Sloane ordered, sensing her strategy. The sailors raised their weapons, tracking the creature's movement. When William was barely 30 yards from the ship, Eleanor uncorked the vial. The effect was immediate. The creature's speed doubled, its growling intensified. She could see its mouth now, stretched impossibly wide to reveal rows of jagged teeth that no human child should possess. "Now!" Eleanor cried, flinging the vial as far as she could away from the ship. The creature changed direction instantly, abandoning its pursuit of the Salvation to chase the airborne vial. It hit the water with a small splash, and William dove beneath the surface after it. For several tense moments, nothing happened. The water where the vial had landed remained still. Then a terrible scream erupted from beneath the waves, a sound of pain and rage that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sea around the spot began to churn and boil. Something dark spread outward, blood, but not the rich crimson of human life. This was black as pitch, viscous and wrong, spreading in tendrils that seemed to move with purpose. "Dear God," whispered Captain Sloane. William surfaced in the middle of the dark slick, his body convulsing violently. The transformation that had begun in Salem was accelerating. Limbs elongating further, skin splitting to reveal something else beneath. He screamed again, And this time, Eleanor could hear the remnants of the child he had been, fighting against whatever was consuming him from within. "Get us out of here," Sloane bellowed to his men. "Full sail, now!" Sudundu. As the Salvation picked up speed, Eleanor watched the horrific scene receding behind them. The dark stain continued to spread across the water, and at its center, William's form seemed to be both expanding and dissolving simultaneously. On the distant shore, she could just make out Abigail Caldwell falling to her knees, hands clutched to her head as if in agony. The connection between matron and child was severing as William's blood underwent its final, catastrophic change. "What's happening to him?" a young sailor whispered, unable to tear his eyes from the spectacle. "The blood is rejecting him," Eleanor explained quietly. "Or he's rejecting it. Either way, the reaction is incompatible." Captain Sloane crossed himself again. "Will it follow us?" Eleanor watched as William's form gave one final violent convulsion before sinking beneath the surface, leaving only the dark stain slowly dissipating in the current. "No," she said with certainty, "that particular threat is gone." But as the Salvation sailed into the gathering darkness, Eleanor knew their danger hadn't passed. In her cabin lay 4 more vials, each containing blood collected from distant branches of a corrupted lineage. And behind them, nursing her rage on Boston's shore, stood Abigail Caldwell, the latest in a line of matrons possessed by an entity that had manipulated the bloodline for generations. That night, alone in her cabin, Eleanor made a decision. The blood samples couldn't simply be destroyed. They had to be neutralized in a way that would prevent the entity from ever accessing their power again. Thomas's journal had hinted at a solution: sacred ground, blessed by practitioners untainted by European influence. Eleanor traced her finger across the crude map Thomas had drawn on the journal's final page. It marked a location deep in the Louisiana bayou, where an unbroken line of healers, contemporaries of the Venezuelan bloodline, but untouched by Isabella's corruption, maintained ancient wards against the very entity that had possessed the Caldwell matrons. As the Salvation cut through the dark Atlantic waters, Eleanor Blackwood set her course, first to Nantucket, then south along the coast until she reached New Orleans. From there, she would seek out the bayou healers and entrust them with neutralizing the remaining samples. The rocking of the ship eventually lulled her into an uneasy sleep. In her dreams, she saw William Caldwell as he had been before, a curious, solemn child, standing beside a beautiful, dark-haired woman who could only be Isabella Caldwell. Behind them stretched a line of figures, each bearing the same haunted expression, each marked by the burden of blood that was never meant to be mixed. "The thirsty one still hungers," Dream William said solemnly, "and Abigail will not stop until the blood returns to the blood." New Orleans, in December 1845, was a city of contradictions: French elegance alongside American ambition, Catholic piety beside Vodun mystery, wealth and poverty separated by mere streets. For Eleanor Blackwood, now traveling under the alias Mrs. Eleanor Pierce, it represented the final stage of her journey. The voyage aboard the Salvation had ended at Nantucket, where Captain Sloane, still shaken by the events in Boston Harbor, had arranged passage for her on a merchant vessel bound for Charleston. From there, Eleanor had made her way to New Orleans, each leg of the journey fraught with anxiety that the Caldwells might somehow be tracking her. Now, standing on a muddy street in the French Quarter, Eleanor consulted Thomas's journal one last time. His final entries contained a name, Marie Laveau, and an address where this woman could supposedly be found. "Pardon, madam." Eleanor approached an elderly vendor selling flowers. "I'm looking for Marie Laveau." The woman's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What business you got with the widow Paris?" Eleanor hesitated. "I have items that need purification. My late husband suggested she might help." The vendor studied Eleanor's face before nodding toward a side street. "Follow that to St. Anne. Then 3 houses past the blue door. Tell her Bernadette sent you. And Madame, she added as Eleanor turned to leave, whatever you carrying that needs cleaning, best keep it hidden. Many eyes in this quarter, not all of them living. The cryptic warning sent a chill down Eleanor's spine, but she followed the directions until she reached a modest house with a red-painted door. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing a striking woman in her 40s with penetrating dark eyes and a regal bearing. "Mrs. Blackwood," the woman said, as if she'd been expecting her. "Or is it Mrs. Pierce now? Names don't matter much to those who seek my help. Come in before what follows you catches up." Stunned, Eleanor stepped inside. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, the front room filled with an eclectic mixture of Catholic imagery and objects Eleanor didn't recognize. Dried herbs, small cloth pouches, bones, and candles of various colors. "You know who I am," Eleanor stated rather than asked. Marie Laveau smiled enigmatically. "I know you carry blood that doesn't belong to you. Blood that has drawn the attention of something ancient and hungry." Eleanor's hand instinctively went to her bag, where the wooden box containing the 4 remaining vials was hidden. "My husband, Thomas Blackwood," Marie nodded. "He wrote to me before his death, speaking of blood collected from distant branches of a corrupted lineage. He asked if I knew how such blood might be neutralized." "Ah, and do you?" Eleanor asked, hope rising in her chest for the first time in months. Marie's expression grew serious. "The entity your husband discovered, the one the indigenous peoples called the Thirsty One, is known by many names in many cultures. Here in New Orleans some call it the Rougarou, though that's not quite accurate." She moved to a cabinet and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "What matters is that it feeds on blood, specifically blood that has been manipulated through ritual to carry certain properties." "Like longevity," Eleanor whispered. "Among other things," Marie confirmed. "Your husband's research suggests the Caldwell family has been serving this entity for generations, believing they were following divine instruction." "Isabella Caldwell claimed God spoke to her," Eleanor recalled, "ordering her to mix bloodlines." Marie's laugh was without humor. "No God commands the mixing of blood for power. The entity manipulated her, as it has manipulated each matron since." She fixed Eleanor with a penetrating stare. "You've seen what happens when the corrupted blood is consumed improperly." Eleanor shuddered, remembering William's terrible transformation in Boston Harbor. "The boy, what happened to him?" "He became a vessel," Marie said simply. "Not a successful one, but a vessel nonetheless. The entity attempted to manifest through him, but couldn't maintain cohesion in our world. It needs a proper ritual, a proper mixing of bloodlines, performed by a properly prepared matron." "Ah, Abigail," Eleanor murmured. Marie nodded gravely. "And she will not stop hunting you. Already her influence spreads, dreams sent to those who might encounter you, promises whispered to those who might betray you." As if to confirm her words, a sudden commotion erupted outside. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. Marie moved swiftly to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. "Men searching the street," she reported. "Not locals. Their movements are too coordinated, too purposeful." Fear clutched at Eleanor's heart. "The Caldwells found me." "Not the Caldwells themselves," Marie corrected. "They're agents. Jonathan Caldwell is a banker with connections throughout the eastern seaboard." "Did you really think you could travel from Boston to New Orleans without being noticed?" Eleanor withdrew the wooden box from her bag. "Take it," she urged, thrusting it toward Marie. "Destroy it, neutralize it. Whatever must be done. I'll lead them away." Marie Laveau took the box with reverent care. "It's not so simple. The blood must be returned to uncorrupted earth, with proper rites to bind the entity away from it. That requires a journey into the deepest bayou, to places where the old powers still hold sway." "Then go without me," Eleanor insisted. "I'll create a diversion." Marie shook her head firmly. "The blood has connected itself to you now, Mrs. Blackwood. You carried it all this way through danger and desperation. Only you can complete the ritual of unbinding. The sounds outside grew closer, men calling to each other, doors being pounded on. Marie made a swift decision. We leave through the back. I have a boat waiting on the canal. We'll travel by water. The entity's influence is weaker there. Within minutes, they had slipped out through a hidden door in Marie's kitchen, hurrying through a maze of narrow alleys until they reached a small canal where a weathered flat-bottomed boat was moored. An elderly man with skin like polished mahogany stood waiting, pole in hand. "Baptiste," Marie greeted him. "We need to reach Mama Cyril's before dawn." The old man's eyes widened slightly when they fell on Eleanor, but he nodded without question. "The waters are restless tonight," he warned as he helped them aboard. "Something stirring in the deep places." As Baptiste poled the boat away from the city, Eleanor looked back at the receding lights of New Orleans. Somewhere in that tangle of streets, men in Jonathan Caldwell's employ were closing in on a location she had already abandoned. But how long before Abigail sensed the blood moving away? How much time did they have before the matron herself came hunting? The boat slid silently into the bayou, the dense canopy of cypress trees soon blocking out what little moonlight filtered through the cloudy sky. Eleanor clutched the wooden box to her chest, feeling a strange warmth emanating from it, as though the blood inside was somehow awakening. "It senses its destination," Marie explained, noticing Eleanor's discomfort. "Blood remembers, Mrs. Blackwood, even separated from the body. It remembers where it belongs." As they penetrated deeper into the bayou, Eleanor began to notice changes in their surroundings. Wisps of luminescent mist clung to the water's surface. Occasionally, lights that were not fireflies appeared between distant trees, watching their passage before blinking out. "The veil grows thin here," Marie whispered, "between our world and others. This is why Mama Cyril makes her home in these waters, to guard the boundaries." After what seemed like hours, Baptiste guided the boat toward a small island crowned by an ancient live oak draped in Spanish moss. At its base stood a small cabin, light glowing from its single window. As they approached, the door opened to reveal a woman so old that Eleanor wondered how she could still stand. Her dark skin was mapped with deep wrinkles, but her eyes were clear and sharp as she surveyed the newcomers. "You bring trouble to my door, Marie Laveau," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong, "and blood that does not belong in this world." Marie helped Eleanor from the boat with deference. "Mama Cyril, this is Eleanor Blackwood. She carries the corrupted blood of the Venezuelan lineage, the one bound to the thirsty one." The old woman's gaze seemed to penetrate Eleanor's very soul. "I have felt it stirring. The matron grows stronger with each passing night. Soon she will be able to cross water without weakening." Eleanor stepped forward, holding out the wooden box. "Please. I was told you can neutralize these samples, prevent the entity from ever using them." Mama Cyril did not take the box. Instead, she turned and walked back into her cabin, beckoning them to follow. Inside, the single room was dominated by an altar covered in objects both familiar and strange, crucifixes alongside gourds and bones, candles burning with flames of unusual colors. "The ritual must begin immediately," the old woman announced, clearing space on the earthen floor. "The blood must be returned to uncorrupted soil, with words of unbinding spoken by one who carried it without intent to use its power." Marie nodded to Eleanor. "That would be you, Mrs. Blackwood." As Mama Cyril began preparations, drawing symbols on the floor with white chalk and setting out small bowls of powdered herbs, Eleanor felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Outside, the bayou had gone completely silent. No frogs, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through the cypress trees. "She knows," Eleanor whispered, a certainty settling in her bones. "Abigail knows what we're doing." Marie and Mama Cyril exchanged grim looks. "Then we have very little time," the old woman said. "The ritual must begin now." The air inside Mama Cyril's cabin grew thick with the smoke of burning herbs as the old woman completed her preparations. On the earthen floor, a circle of white chalk now enclosed complex geometric patterns, unlike any Eleanor had seen before. Not quite European, not quite African, with elements that seemed older than either tradition. These symbols predate the arrival of both our peoples to these shores, Mama Cyril explained, noting Eleanor's curious gaze. They belong to those who understood the Thirsty One long before Isabella Caldwell ever heard its whispers. In the center of the circle, she had placed 5 small clay bowls, one for each of the remaining vials, and a larger central one that remained empty. The blood must be poured in a specific order, the old woman instructed Eleanor. Each vial represents a branch of the lineage. Together they form a binding that must be properly undone. Outside, Baptiste kept watch, his weathered face tense as he scanned the darkness beyond the cabin's small window. Marie Laveau stood near the door, a string of wooden beads moving continuously through her fingers as she murmured what sounded like prayers in a mixture of French, Latin, and a language Eleanor didn't recognize. "It's time," Mama Cyril announced, handing Eleanor the wooden box. "Open it, but do not touch the vials with your bare skin. The blood has awakened." Eleanor did as instructed, carefully lifting the lid to reveal the 4 remaining vials. In the dim candlelight, she could see that the dark liquid inside was indeed changed, no longer still, but moving of its own accord, swirling against the glass as if seeking escape. "The Thirsty One senses our intent," Marie murmured from her position by the door. "It stirs within the blood." Following Mama Cyril's precise instructions, Eleanor carefully removed the first vial. Using a small piece of cloth to avoid direct contact, she uncorked it and poured its contents into the first of the small clay bowls. The blood did not flow like liquid should. Instead, it moved in a viscous, almost reluctant stream, clinging to the sides of the vial until the last drop finally fell. As soon as the blood touched the clay, the symbols nearest that bowl began to glow with a faint blue light. A low humming sound filled the cabin, just at the threshold of hearing. "Continue," Mama Cyril urged. "Quickly now." Eleanor moved to the second vial, repeating the process. As its contents joined the ritual, the humming intensified, and more symbols illuminated. By the third vial, sweat beaded on Eleanor's forehead despite the December chill, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. "The final vial," Mama Cyril said, her voice tight with urgency. "Pour it, then speak the words of unbinding." Just as Eleanor reached for the 4th vial, a sudden wind howled outside the cabin, unnatural in its focused intensity. The door rattled violently in its frame, and Marie braced herself against it, her prayers growing more rapid. "She's here," Baptiste called from the window, his voice cracking with fear. "The Matron comes across the water." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Through the window, she could see a thick, unnatural fog rolling across the bayou toward their island. Within it, barely visible, moved a feminine figure that seemed to glide rather than walk across the water's surface. "Quickly!" Mama Cyril commanded. With shaking hands, Eleanor uncorked the final vial and poured its contents into the 4th bowl. All the symbols were now glowing, casting the cabin in an eerie blue light that pulsed in rhythm with the humming sound. "Now," the old woman pressed a small knife into Eleanor's palm, 3 drops of your own blood into the center bowl. "You carried this burden. Your blood must seal its fate." The sound of splintering wood came from the door as Marie struggled to hold it against an increasingly violent assault. Outside, the fog had reached the island, tendrils of it seeping beneath the door and through the window's crude shutters. "Eleanor Blackwood," Abigail's voice called from the darkness, no longer sounding entirely human. "The blood must return to the blood. You cannot stop what was ordained." Eleanor didn't hesitate. She sliced her palm with the knife and held it over the central bowl, watching as 3 drops of her blood fell into it. As the 3rd drop landed, Mama Cyril began to chant in a language that seemed to bend the air around them. She motioned for Eleanor to repeat after her. I unbind this blood from unnatural purpose, Eleanor recited, her voice growing stronger with each word. I sever its connection to the thirsty one. I return it to the earth, unbound and uncorrupted. The symbols flared with blinding intensity. The blood in each of the 4 small bowls began to move, flowing of its own accord toward the central bowl containing Eleanor's blood. As they combined, a sound like a distant scream filled the cabin. Outside, Abigail's inhuman howl of rage cut through the night. The door finally gave way, crashing inward to reveal the transformed matron. Abigail Caldwell's features distorted into something both more and less than human, her eyes glowing with the same amber light that had consumed William. Behind her, moving with the same blank synchronization Eleanor had seen in Boston, came a procession of local people clearly under her influence. "Too late," Mama Cyril declared with grim satisfaction, as the combined blood in the central bowl began to bubble and steam. "The unbinding is complete." Abigail lunged toward the ritual circle, but an invisible barrier repelled her violently. She screamed again, a sound of thwarted rage that seemed to come from multiple throats simultaneously. "You fool!" she spat at Eleanor, her voice layered with other voices beneath her own. "Do you know what you've done? The lineage was sacred, divinely ordained." "There was nothing divine about it," Eleanor replied steadily, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Isabella Caldwell was deceived by the thirsty one, as were you. It ends here, Abigail." In the central bowl, the blood had begun to blacken and char, releasing a thick smoke that, instead of rising, flowed downward into the earth floor beneath the cabin. Mama Cyril continued her chant, and Marie joined her, their voices weaving together in powerful harmony. Abigail's form seemed to flicker, as if something within her was fighting to maintain control. "The blood!" she gasped, momentarily sounding like herself again. "It burns!" The people behind her began to collapse one by one, the matron's influence waning as the ritual progressed. Outside, the unnatural fog started to dissipate, revealing the normal sounds and smells of the bayou returning. "The corruption is being drawn out," Marie explained to Eleanor, "not just from the samples, but from all branches of the lineage. The thirsty one is losing its hold." Abigail fell to her knees, her body convulsing as it had when William underwent his terrible transformation. But unlike the boy, she wasn't changing shape. Instead, something seemed to be leaving her, a dark essence pulling away from her human form like smoke being drawn from a fire. "Help me," she pleaded, momentarily lucid, her eyes meeting Eleanor's with desperate clarity. "It's been inside me, inside all of us for generations." Despite everything, Eleanor felt a surge of pity. She started toward Abigail, but Mama Cyril's iron grip on her arm held her back. "Do not break the circle," the old woman warned. "The entity seeks a new vessel. It would take you if it could." The dark essence continued to separate from Abigail, forming a vaguely humanoid shape above her prostrate form. It writhed and twisted, seeming to search for somewhere to go, as the ritual pulled it inexorably toward the center bowl. "Return to the deep," Mama Cyril commanded, her voice carrying supernatural authority. "You who feed on blood and fear, return to the spaces between worlds where you belong." With a final, unearthly shriek that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, the dark essence collapsed inward upon itself. It streamed like liquid shadow into the central bowl and down into the earth. The blue light of the symbols flared one final time, then faded, leaving the cabin in near darkness, lit only by the few remaining candles. In the doorway, Abigail Caldwell lay motionless. Marie cautiously approached her, checking for signs of life. "She lives," Marie announced, sounding surprised, "though I doubt her mind will ever recover from what has happened." Eleanor sank to her knees, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The ritual had drawn something from her as well, not an entity, but the fear and determination that had sustained her since Thomas's death. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Truly over?" Mama Cyril studied the now empty bowl at the center of the ritual circle. The blood, both Eleanor's and that from the vials, had vanished completely, absorbed into the earth. "The binding is broken," the old woman confirmed. "The thirsty one is banished from this bloodline. It may find others in time, such entities always do, but the Caldwell lineage is free of its influence." "And the people Abigail controlled?" Eleanor nodded toward the unconscious forms outside the cabin. "They will awaken with no memory of tonight," Marie assured her. "A blessing, all things considered." As dawn broke over the bayou, Eleanor helped Marie tend to the still unconscious Abigail. The woman appeared physically unchanged, but Marie warned that her mind might never fully recover from decades of possession. "What will happen to her?" Eleanor asked. "There is a convent upriver that cares for those with afflictions of the spirit," Marie replied. "She will find peace there, or as much peace as one can after such an experience." Before they left the island, Mama Cyril took Eleanor aside, pressing a small cloth pouch into her hand. "Your blood participated in the unbinding," she said gravely. "That creates a connection that cannot be completely severed. If the thirsty one ever finds another way into this world, it may seek you out." Eleanor stared at the pouch. "What is this?" "Protection," the old woman replied simply. "Carry it always, and if you ever bear children, ensure they carry it as well. Some battles extend beyond a single generation." As Baptiste poled their boat back toward New Orleans, Eleanor watched the bayou awaken around them. Birds calling, insects humming, life continuing as it had for centuries before Isabella Caldwell ever claimed to hear the voice of God. The wooden box that had contained the blood vials now lay empty in her lap, a reminder of how close the world had come to something terrible. Marie seemed to read her thoughts. "You wonder if it was worth it? The lives lost, the suffering endured." Eleanor nodded. "Thomas died for this. William was corrupted. Countless others suffered under the Caldwell's influence. And for what? Blood that promised extended life, but delivered only bondage to something inhuman. The thirst for immortality drives people to terrible bargains," Marie observed. "Your husband discovered the truth and paid with his life. You completed what he began." In the distance, the spires of New Orleans came into view, the city awakening to a day like any other, unaware of the ancient evil that had nearly manifested fully in the world. "What will you do now?" Marie asked. Eleanor considered the question. With Thomas gone and her connection to the Caldwells severed, she was truly alone for the first time in her life. Yet she also felt strangely unburdened, free to choose her own path. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like to learn more about the work you do, Madame Laveau. About protections and boundaries, and keeping the world safe from things that hunger in the dark." Marie smiled, a genuine warmth lighting her eyes. "New Orleans could use more guardians, Mrs. Blackwood, and I could use an apprentice with your courage." As their boat slid into a canal at the edge of the city, Eleanor tucked Mama Cyril's protective pouch into her dress, close to her heart. The Caldwell bloodline might be free of its corrupted legacy, but there would always be other threats, other entities seeking to break through from spaces between worlds. For now, though, the thirsty one had been sent back to the darkness from which it came. And Eleanor Blackwood, widow, survivor, and now apprentice to Marie Laveau, would ensure it remained there. This was only the beginning. The darkness continues in part 2. Subscribe now so you don't miss it.